Welcome to the GenXplainers, where we look at pop culture from a personal and generational perspective and examine how the music, movies, and television of our formative years shaped our tastes and attitudes. And welcome to the show. Today we're talking movies, specifically movies from 1979, and the Best Picture nominees and winner of that year. I'm here with Al on that couch.
Hello.
And Mike on this couch.
Hey.
So
Pretty animated bunch.
yeah, we just had a heavy lunch. Bear with us. So the nominees for Best Picture from 1979 are as follows: All That Jazz, Apocalypse Now, Breaking Away, Kramer vs. Kramer, and Norma Ray. So I thought we'd start by talking about our reactions and how we like these films. And we'll just do it in turn, and we'll start with Alan this time.
Sure.
So let's talk about All That Jazz.
I had not seen All That Jazz when it came out. I don't think it would have been appropriate for me to have seen it when it came out. So I watched it for the first time a few weeks ago, and it was a very interesting movie. I have to say that for me, the best part of it was the end. There was a lot of kind of repetition in the beginning of, you know, his lifestyle and taking pills, and maybe I should just say that this is kind of a lightly fictionalized version of Bob Fosse's life.
Yeah, we could sort of summarize the movie, which I didn't do. But yeah, All That Jazz. Bob Fosse, he wrote and directed it.
Yeah.
Right?
So, and choreographed, I believe. I thought Roy Scheider was good. Very good as the Joe Gideon character.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed the cast generally. His daughter, his ex-wife, all of them, and I did like the choreographed dance scenes. But it was pretty repetitive in the beginning, and there was a point towards the middle where I'm like, oh, what are we getting? Like, what are we saying here? And then the end of the movie, not to give away too much, is basically a big kind of dance number and song and dance number about his life, and I enjoyed that part the most.
Yeah, I think in general we shouldn't worry too much about like spoilers.
That's true.
Because it's very, I'll tell you now though, spoilers folks, we may be saying things because these movies are very old, and go see them, go watch them now, pause this, go watch them, and you can come back.
Go watch all of them.
Go watch them all.
They're 44 years old.
We did. Mike, what about you with All That Jazz? What was your experience with that? Yeah, we'll go to you. We'll go clockwise.
Okay. 5, 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, please do it in the form of a musical number.
My initial thoughts after watching it, because I hadn't seen it either. This is the first time I had seen it. My initial thoughts afterwards is like, wow, I just spent 2 hours watching an asshole. And, sometimes that's not really that pleasant of an experience.
Right.
Yeah. So I didn't really care about the film that much because I didn't care about him. And typically for me, for a movie, I don't necessarily have to always like a character or like a main character, but I do at least have to want to watch what's going on in their life and have to be in their world and want to be in that world for that time that I'm going to spend. Didn't want to.
You want to have something to
I wanted to get to. I just wanted to get away from this guy. I agree with Alan though that the numbers, the musical parts were actually great, and the editing, and it did win for editing. But for me, my initial thoughts right afterwards was I just felt like I not wasted my time, but I felt like I just had 2 hours of really being uncomfortable and not really wanting to be there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not that I don't like movies that have sort of anti-heroes or whatever, or people who are imperfect and maybe even they're assholes, but you got to have something to hang on to or relate to, so you can root for them a little bit more. It was, I mean, him being really good at his job at the expense of everything else isn't enough for me to like or even understand why he's doing these things necessarily. I mean, again, generally speaking, I think it was a pretty good movie. It's not something I'd go out of my way to watch, but it felt very stagey. Makes sense. Again, the numbers were really good, and Scheider was great. But it's just not my, well, I wouldn't say it's not my type of movie. What does that even mean? It was very unique in its visual style because it sort of borrowed his sensibility of showmanship or whatever. So generally speaking, it's a pretty good movie, and I understand why it was nominated, certainly, and why it was popular.
Well, and it's also, Hollywood loves movies about itself.
Yes, they do. Mm-hmm. So our next movie, going alphabetically, is Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, so this is a movie that has stayed with me ever since I saw it. I don't think I saw it when it first came out. I don't think it would not have been appropriate for me to have seen it, given the age I was at when it came out. But I saw it in high school, I think, and has stayed with me ever since. And I've seen it. It's the only one of these 5 films that I've seen more than once, not counting the fact that I saw some of them a second time for this show. So I saw it on my own numerous times by my own choice, and it's a fantastic film. It's the source material is the Joseph Conrad story that I can't even remember the name of it right now.
Heart of Darkness.
Heart of Darkness, yes. And the performances, the direction, the music, I think it's amazing.
It's incredibly audacious and of an undertaking. I also think that the fact that it was and the things that happened to bog it down in production were a result of the audaciousness or whatever, audacity. And, well, we'll get into winners and losers and what Hollywood thought about it, but I think there was definitely a backlash on it. I mean, we look at it later and go, wow, that is an achievement. Not just like storytelling, but technically across the board. But I think in the time, when you think about some of these other movies that are nominated, and perhaps one, I think people were a little bit like, this kid or this guy thinks he can do anything, and it was a flop in Hollywood's eyes because it cost so much money, and it had issues. Well, yeah, maybe.
I mean, yeah. Well, Hollywood's always going to say if it didn't make the money that we spent on it, it's going to be a flop. And It's like, well, that's sort of like the way Hollywood is now, more so than ever. Back then,
it's always been that way.
But back then, there were still people who still wanted to do those kind of movies. They still did. Yes, they cared about the marketing. Yes, they cared about audiences, but they still wanted to get those movies out there. Nowadays, if they don't get those movies out there, they don't care. They just, as long as they don't lose money. And understandably, it is a business. I mean, it is a business. Yeah. But the thing is like, you see less and less of this out there now. Nowadays, they're independent movies that may get bought at a festival, and that's it.
Sure. The other 3 nominees who we'll talk about, what kind of films they are. They're smaller films. Yeah. They're simple and they're traditional kind of Hollywood storytelling. Yeah. They're good. I'm not saying they're not good, but I'm just saying because those are the ones nominated, perhaps gives us an insight into where people's heads were in the Academy, the people who nominated them. But see where their heads were, these people.
The anonymous group of people.
Well, of the 5 films we're talking about for this specific year, I mean, it was the film that did what no other film did, and it probably still has done what no other film in history has done, kind of thing. I mean, people have tried to maybe copy it, but I think nobody's ever really recreated what he did with this movie.
Yeah, and I think in retrospect, I think most people would agree it's one of the best films ever.
Yeah.
Not just about like war or about Vietnam, but just like, here's sort of how I think about it. When you look at it as a whole, maybe it doesn't feel. It maybe feels too bloated or too self-indulgent, but they think about all the set pieces within it, the scenes that are just fantastic and amazingly well done from the acting, from the technical, the sound design, and the direction. It's just amazingly good.
When I first saw it, I didn't get it. When I first saw it, and I was probably in high school too at the same time.
Yeah.
I saw it as an anti-war movie, and that's it. It's like, well, no, actually, it's not really.
It's bigger than that.
But even Coppola himself says it's not an anti-war movie. Because he said it glorifies war, and he doesn't think of it as an anti-war movie. He thinks of it as just a statement on the conflict between Eastern and Western worlds. And this is what I got out of this rewatch, because I hadn't seen it for like 20 years probably. Mm-hmm. All the scenes where you have these Americans coming in, their whole idea of home is Playboy bunnies and
right.
surfing and all this stuff. And the people in Vietnam, they're just fighting for their home.
Right.
That's their idea of home is something they fight for. When Americans,
right.
their idea of home is like fun.
I think Martin Sheen actually has a voiceover line that says, the more they tried to make it like home, the further they felt away, or something like that. It was like, this doesn't work.
Kilgore had a pretty good day for himself. They choppered in the T-bones and the beer and turned the LZ into a beach party. The more they tried to make it just like home, the more they made everybody miss it.
As far as anti-war movie goes, I always took it as it's about how war forces you to look at who you really are in a way, or what do you need to make yourself become to deal with being in that situation, being in a war. And the Kurtz character is the obvious example of that. And also Martin Sheen's character, you wonder at the end, is he going to pull a Kurtz? I mean, because he can be the new Kurtz. They're all bowing to him. He sees the madness of it. He sees how crazy it is. And he sees how the brass and the military higher-ups don't know how to win this war, basically. And maybe Kurtz is right about you have to become this. If you're going to try to get the objective of what they're saying is their objective, then you have to become something else, And in my mind, that is anti-war, because war makes you go to a heart of darkness, go to a dark place in yourself if you really are committing to this idea of winning the war, in this specific case, I guess. To me, that's anti-war.
Yeah, there's that great line at the very beginning of the movie where Martin Sheen's character says, when I'm here, I wish I was there. And when I was there, I just tried to get back here.
Right.
And how, so to me, it's maybe it is somewhat anti-war, but it is definitely about how war changes you.
Yeah, and that's actually what what Coppola was saying.
Sure.
About the movie himself, because people always ask him, like, why'd you make this anti-war movie? And then he would tell them, I didn't make an anti-war movie.
Right.
That's not what the movie is.
Yeah.
To me, at least.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I wrote a paper on this movie in college, and my point then, which if I remember correctly, was it was an idea of colonialism from the West into these nations. And that idea of bringing Western things like surfing, let's have a barbecue, let's play, Wagner when we fly in to scare the shit out of them. That is sort of a very overt, example of colonial force into a country. And of course, they had that subtext of the French historical context that I think in Redux, there's more they put, which is
there's more in that. Yeah,
they talk more about the French era of Vietnamese history, where again they colonized and but anyway, to me that's always been a big part of it. It's sort of like we don't really understand how to win this war because we're bringing all these ideas of war from the Western world into can't we just use our firepower and blow the shit out of them? It's like, well. No, these people know their country. They know how to live. They know how to, and they're going to fight to defend their country, how they know how to do it. And you aren't understanding. And that goes to the whole idea of Kurtz of like, well, if we're really going to win, we're going to be ruthless. We're going to find the spies and behead them and put them on pikes. Obviously it goes a little far. But yeah, I mean, to me.
Oh, no. He's perfectly sane.
I'm telling you, it's not a message.
He's perfectly sane. That's cool.
Good.
And just to amplify on something you mentioned very early on when we were talking about this movie, I think it's interesting that we're just doing this list alphabetically, but if you're talking about the tension in movies between art and entertainment, I think it's interesting that these first two are trying to be more artistic, whereas the rest on this list are more just entertainment.
Yeah.
And whatever you think of how all that jazz pulls it off, it is trying to be more of an artistic film rather than...
Very much, yes. Yeah. Very much so. Okay, well, let's go to the next film, Breaking Away. If you haven't seen it, and I guess this one might be one that people haven't seen. In its day, it was very popular. I remember loving this movie.
It was.
It's about, generally speaking, a kid growing up in Indiana, small town. He's got a group of friends, and he has aspirations to be a bicyclist, professional bicyclist or a racer, or someone who, and he idolizes the Italian racing team.
What'd you do, win again?
Oh, the victory, she was easy. But the promoter, Fondatore, he tells me that the Italians will be here maybe soon. And I will race with the best of them. Italianos. Like the nightingales, they sing. Like the eagles, they fly.
Speaking of flies, brought a hell of a lot of flies in with you.
Did you know fly in Italian is mosca?
Did you know in English it's pest? Speaking of pests.
Isn't this a lovely trophy, dear? Look.
Oh, yeah. So what? I lived 50 years. I never got a trophy.
You never got a trophy, Papa.
Nope, I never got one.
So I give you this one. You are numero uno, King Papa.
Don't do that. How many
No, I have to take a shower.
Yeah, so I saw Breaking Away when I was, so unlike the others, this was appropriate for me to see when I was a kid. I think I saw it on television rather than in the theaters. But I remember it being a kind of fun, quirky, almost sweet movie, and upon rewatching it, it is pretty much that. I had forgotten that Dennis Quaid was in it and Daniel Stern. I did remember Jackie Earle Haley. I think he was in a lot of stuff back then.
He was.
He was a Bad News Bear and all that stuff. And it's a really enjoyable movie. It's easy to digest, but also worth digesting. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I felt the same way. I think I saw it on 16 millimeter for a magazine drive at Castro.
Really?
Yeah.
How funny.
Yeah, it was that and Slapshot and Jaws.
That's a pretty good.
It
triple
is. That's
bill.
pretty
Well,
good.
it wasn't all at the same time. It's like different years,
Gotcha.
but the magazine sales, and so they give you you get, if you ranked high in the magazine sales, you get a movie screening in the cafeteria.
I just want to say how that whole concept of everything you just said ages us. Magazine drive, 16 millimeter projection in the cafeteria. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, so
Cafeteria is just an app for your phone.
Right, exactly. It's an app now.
So anyway, yeah. So I felt the same way about it. My recollection of it from then to now was very different, though, because I hadn't seen it in a very long time. And my recollection of it was it moved much faster than I remember. I remember the race at the end being like this grand thing that took over like a third of the movie. But it's really like 15 minutes, kind of thing. But I don't know. It's an enjoyable movie. It's easily palatable.
It's got a very winning lead character.
It's a little dated at times.
Sure.
Would I put it up as Best Picture nomination? I don't know if I would. But it's enjoyable, and it's worth the watch. Yeah.
Is it a Best Picture nominee? That's a good question. Is what I'm saying.
In my mind, no. But
If the Full Monty is.
Yeah, you're right. It's true.
There is a history of these types of movies being nominated. Again, is it supposed to be an entertaining movie that's the Best Picture, or is it an artistic movie?
Right.
This is not an artistic movie.
Right.
Although, I will say that I have never, ever seen a performance from Paul Dooley that I did not love.
yeah.
Paul Dooley's great.
Paul Dooley's great in everything.
Yeah.
I
Even
think
16 Candles.
Yeah.
the character of the father and how he treats his son, I think we talked about this a little bit at one point. That's a little dated in a way. And he's pretty mean to his son.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, back in the day, fathers had expectations. Like if my dad thought I was pursuing something stupid, he would just tell me and say it too. I mean, it's not like today, really. I mean, I think it's appropriate for the time.
If you see any TV shows or movies based in that period too, the fathers are that way.
Yeah. I think it was Wonder Years.
Wonder Years. Freaks and Geeks, even the dad in that was kind of like that way at times too. So
and he's not necessarily even wrong, because he isn't. I mean, what is he really going to do? I mean, that's sort of the underlying thing. All of them wonder what the hell they're going to do. You're not going to be the football star, and you're just a weirdo. What are you going to do? And you're anyway. That's a big theme in it. It's like, where are we going to go, and what kind of dreams are we supposed to have? There's that scene with the father who talks about, when he worked in the quarry, he brings them to the school and says, these kids here, they're going to school in buildings that I built, or that I cut the rock for these things, but I'm not welcome here. And that's kind of an underlying kind of idea of the film in a way. I think there's like this idea of like, there are people who are looked down upon because of what they do, when what they do is foundational, almost literally, in this case, to what makes the stuff work, and what makes the world go round. So
the cutters
forever, man. So it does deal with themes in a very palatable way. So it totally does actually make sense. I mean, it makes sense. It's a good movie. I mean, it's dated because it's old. Whatever. Right. I thought the main actor.
Dennis Christopher
was really good. A good character, very. And he did a good performance too, emotional time.
And he's very endearing.
He's very endearing. He's a winning personality,
And who doesn't love to hate Hart Bochner in a film?
Ready to order douche.
What was his name in Die Hard? Ellis.
Yeah.
That's right. All right. So, okay, next. Kramer versus Kramer.
Kramer versus Kramer, the story of a divorce and child custody sort of battle. Of these 5 movies that we're discussing from the Best Picture list, this is the only one I saw in the theaters. For some reason, at 11 years old, I really wanted to see this movie. And to this day, my brother's like, why did you drag us? Like, we could have seen any movie. And you brought us to Kramer versus Kramer. I don't know. Maybe because my parents were divorced, or maybe because I already had the yearnings to be an actor, and I could tell just from the commercials that it was well acted.
Yes, Dustin Hoffman is great in this.
Dustin Hoffman's great. Meryl Streep is great.
The kid is great.
Actually. The kid is great. Yeah. Looking back on it, it felt in some ways kind of 2-dimensional rather than 3-dimensional.
Sure.
A little bit, but it's a very conventional type of story, and it's a good movie. And I really think it's the performances that carry it more than the story or the writing.
Yeah.
Well, I had never seen it.
Okay.
So I came in with a totally different perspective, not different than yours, but
Did you have expectations about it?
I did. I had expectations where I'm going to be depressed and it's going to be like really dark and hard to watch and all that stuff. And it wasn't. It was not at all. I actually felt like they treated both the wife and the husband with very good respect in their characters, even if they did kind of lean a little bit towards her abandonment issues.
They did.
They did lean heavy towards that, except the fact that they still made it where he never treated her as if she did anything really terrible. He still really respected her.
He certainly didn't do it in front of his son.
Right, exactly.
Okay, he might have talked to his lawyer and said...
And he probably felt it.
Right.
But he never really made it look like she did something, the worst possible thing in the world, and made her be a villain. She was never a villain, right. I like that.
Yeah. He was very angry with her.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And said, no, it's not fair, throw the glass, whatever.
Well, and you could tell, and this is credit to Dustin Hoffman, after he got those angry moments with her, you could tell the guilt he felt over those moments too. I felt, at least when I was watching it, that he felt guilty for being that way because he didn't want to be that person and be angry going forward. And he was trying to just be the parent, be the responsible one, and trying to just take care of things. And even though at the beginning of the movie, you see him kind of like in all for himself and his job and all that stuff.
A little douchey.
Yeah, a little douchey. There's something about it that what he did with her, to treat her character in such a really great way. And then you see him with his son, and just watching that, it just overall, I just really liked that about the movie. And you're right about the performances. That's what sells the movie.
And she didn't get a lot of like on-screen time, like pleading her case, but I think her case is made by his inability to deal with it in the beginning, because he is realizing, because before that's like, oh, I'm working, you take care of the kid kind of idea. Yeah. And he realizes from the get-go that taking care of a child is a huge deal. And I think for the time, again, it's a very simple story, but for the time, this story wasn't told in this way, in a real way. Right. And I think one of the things that comes out is that the abandonment thing, especially, is like that was how people thought about it. Especially if the wife left, it's like, oh, how can she do that? She has the kids because it's her job to take care of the kids, kind of thing, And this was like saying, well, wait a minute, this guy's not even involved in the raising of his kid, And and through the story, he learns to connect and learns how to do it and realizes how hard it is. And then because of that, when it gets to a point where she says, well, I'm going to take my son now, he's like, whoa,
Yeah.
And in a way, he's right. In a way, it's like, do you understand her point now?
My wife, my ex-wife, says that she loves Billy, and I believe she does. But I don't think that's the issue here. If I understand it correctly, what means the most here is what's best for our son, what's best for Billy. My wife used to always say to me, why can't a woman have the same ambitions as a man? I think you're right. And maybe I learned that much. But by the same token, I'd like to know, what law is it that says that a woman is a better parent simply by virtue of her sex?
Like Alan mentioned, that his parents had divorced by this time the movie came out. And mine had too. And mine was even closer because my mom did leave and not seek custody until later. But I think the way it deals with both parties, like you were saying, Mike, is very even-handed, and it just shows the situation and how the feelings that people have in these sort of can be very ugly situations of a divorce. It's sort of, it doesn't try to tell you what thing to believe in, which side is right necessarily, It talks about what the preconceived notions of what people think. Oh, the mom always gets the custody, or you're a man, so you got to deal with your career. What are you doing fooling around with the stuff that doesn't matter, like raising your kid? That kind of stuff at the time was like, oh, wow, yeah, I didn't think about that. Like now it's like, duh, sure, Yeah.
I also thought Jane Alexander was brilliant in that role. I just thought she was so good.
She was very good.
And Jo Beth Williams' glasses were great too.
So all in all, Kramer vs. Kramer, a very good movie. Dustin Hoffman's sort of in rare form here. He was so good in the 70s. Not saying he wasn't good other times, but yeah, real good.
Well, I would just say on the one thing I had said before about there being a certain amount of two-dimensionality to it, I was mainly referring to, I think, the mother's side of the story. I just think that Meryl Streep justifies it very well in her performance, but I think they kind of gloss over her kind of side of the story. And not that they have to. It is mainly the story of this divorced father and his son. But I did find her story a little bit lacking.
Yeah, and I did notice that even at the time I felt like, well, they don't really show her side much. I mean, she kind of tries to tell him at the beginning about how she's feeling, but
she's part of the title. She's
it's about me,
right? But she handles it really well. As the actress handles the character well, and kind of, she's good. I think she's going places. All right, and our fifth nominee, Norma Ray with Sally Field. A story of a garment factory worker and the other workers, and guy comes into town wanting to unionize. And it's sort of the story of Sally Field's character. And not just her job, but kind of how she's viewed in the town in a way. Anyway, let's talk about it.
It's the only one on the list that's based on a true story, correct?
Is it a true story?
I thought it was Norma Ray is based on a true story.
I to be honest, I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't think so.
I thought it was, but maybe
I have notes. Maybe I put it.
Well, I mean, there was a Vietnam War.
Well, it is based on a true story.
Okay, there you go.
Crystal Lee Sutton was the original one, woman, her real name, and that's who it's based on. Anyway.
Oh, all right. I'm going to edit that in as
to make it seem like we knew that.
Okay.
Yeah, because we can't be seen as having any kind of...
No. But anyway, how did we feel about that?
I had never seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
So I was watching it for the first time, much like all that jazz. And I also found it kind of dated in a way. Obviously, it takes place in the 70s, so in some sense, that's always going to be the case. But I do think that there was I don't know, the pace of the storytelling seems very slow at times. I felt that way a little bit about all that jazz and a little bit about Kramer versus Kramer, too. Not as much. It's a compelling story, and I think it's a great character and a great performance by Sally Field. It didn't really grab me as much. I mean, the story is compelling, like the unionization of the workers and all of that. But I really liked her, and I didn't really like much of the rest. I mean, I think she's an interesting character because she's sort of viewed as kind of a loose woman.
Yes.
She's kind of sleeping around a little bit, and not being taken very seriously. Kind of being seen as kind of a pest within the workplace, and so they try and neutralize her by putting her in charge and putting her in charge of reprimanding people who aren't doing their jobs.
Right.
And so in that sort of dialectical sense, it is very interesting. But for some reason, it's hard for me to put my finger on it. It just wasn't really grabbing me.
You hadn't seen this one, right?
I had not, and I had seen it, but I didn't remember it until I saw it. I'm like, oh wait, I have seen this. Then I remembered this scene, and it's not like I'd seen those scenes over and over again. So I knew I had seen it at least one time because there was too many scenes that I remembered. There's obviously the famous one on the table. That one everybody's seen, kind of. But so yeah, I agree with Alan on this one. Sally Field's great in it. And a number of the performances to me are great, actually, but her in particular, and she was also one of my first celebrity crushes too.
Smokey and the Bandit.
It was actually Flying Nun.
Oh, Flying! Wow, early.
We're going to learn a lot about
Yeah.
in these next few moments, I think.
That I really like.
Any flying religious figure.
Flying religious figures.
Well, it's not that; it's the erotic attachment to the flying religious figures that I think.
That's the interesting part.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, what I did like about Norma Rae a lot was the performance, and I like the story because I mean, who doesn't like a really good underdog story who comes out and like basically makes a change in their small town, so on. So there's nothing really not to dislike about it. But for me, the things that stand out the most are the style that they used with like the sound with from the loud factory to the quiet moments, and how they built those two different worlds in such a way where her personal world and the when they start coming together, you notice the differences that they do with the sound as it progresses too, and it's really interesting how they build that. It's like they're completely separate at the beginning, and then suddenly they're overlapping each other a lot, and I like that aspect of it. So in that way, the way they structure the story is really interesting.
Yeah.
And I would have picked it up when I saw it, whenever that was, like back in the 80s.
The thing that really illustrates that is that scene where she gets up on the table and holds the sign that says Union. One of the very first scenes is her mother losing her hearing because of how loud it is.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's always referenced along as the film goes on. It's so loud in there, and then that sets up the huge impact of when she stands up in the middle of the sound. They're able to use the audio to show support by having it quieter and quieter and quieter as each machine goes off, and that's some good writing there. That's good. That's good. Yeah. A good, that's a good way to make a film moment right there.
Yeah. Of all the films on this list, that and Breaking Away are the two that I guess I understand why they were nominated, but for me the weakest on the list as far as like filmmaking goes. So anyway,
Yeah, I think Norma Ray, I kind of understand why it was nominated, because it's a story of one person, their journey and the struggles, and an underdog, like you said, and a woman. And again, at the time, you weren't seeing a ton of these stories, you know. I mean, you were seeing more and more, obviously, but this idea that, you know, she's stuck in this situation, like she's working with her mother who's losing her hearing, and she just sees herself, that just happening to her, and like Alan was saying, she's kind of looked at as a tramp or something of the town or whatever, a loose woman, and she has nothing to really believe in, you know. She seems very trapped. And then when this union organizer comes in, she kind of eventually kind of feels like, well, this is something that I can believe in and I can work for, and I may lose things because of it, but I believe in it, and I'm gonna, you know, maybe leaving reluctantly at certain points, but she's gonna stand up for it, literally. It changes her, and you know at the end of the movie that she's going to be a leader in that community in some way, I think. And I had seen the movie years ago, but not for a long time. And then watching it again, I actually really enjoyed it. I like the scene when the union bigwigs come and visit, and actually their issue is like, oh, well, Norma's got a bad reputation. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's just like, to me, it's just like, so it's a very angering moment, because it's like, oh, you're perceived this way, so you're not useful to us, you know. And that she was able to stick with her journey. And then last thing about that I love is the husband. He's just a supportive guy. I mean, he gets mad, and
he gets mad.
And in another movie or other movies, you'd think, oh, well, he's going to become abusive or do something. And in the end, he's just like, well, Norma Ray, well, what do we need to do? I'll support you, you know. And it's like, I feel like this is just what she needed.
I feel like what she needed was something to believe in, kind of what you were saying. Like, she's, in a weird way, she's kind of drifting in the beginning of the film, both in terms of like relationships and her career, and in a way I feel like there just wasn't anything that was worthy or serious enough for her to invest herself into.
Right.
Even, you know, her marriage to Beau Bridges' character, he is a supportive character, even though he gets angry. But even that is sort of entered into kind of like, well, I guess I got to get married.
Right, that's true. Yeah. Well, it's what you do.
But when this unionization comes along, and when Ron Liebman's character, the union organizer, comes along and sees just how amazing she is, and there's no sense of, from him, like, oh, you can only do so much because you're a woman.
Right.
He has that belief from him.
He pushes like crazy. It's like, you're not doing what you can do.
Yeah.
You know, you sell yourself short completely. Yeah.
And that's when she really awakens.
Yeah. So the film that won for Best Picture that year was Kramer versus Kramer. Mm-hmm. So let me just start with, do we agree from those 5 films whether that was a good choice, the right choice?
No.
And why would that be?
End of show.
That was a great podcast, this guy.
So I think that Apocalypse Now is definitely much better than Kramer versus Kramer. And that's nothing against Kramer versus Kramer. I think Apocalypse Now is great storytelling, but also great art. I think it has had more impact on our culture than Kramer versus Kramer did. To this day, I think you still hear people, at least, you know, around our age or older, or probably a little bit younger, that will say that they love the smell of napalm in the morning because it smells like victory. I mean, that's a line that has endured, and that movie endures. There's 4 different versions of this movie that you can watch. You know, they don't do that about just any movie.
Right. Okay, that's your choice.
No, I agree that. But here's the thing. It's like a film like Apocalypse Now probably would never actually win, though. It would be nominated, but it probably would never win from the Academy. And that's the thing about it, is like, that's the films that we would prefer. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of films. I didn't want Titanic to win, but guess what? I didn't want Dance with Wolves to win. Guess what?
Yeah.
And in this particular case, I'm with you. I don't agree with what they chose, even though I really, really liked Kramer vs. Kramer, having seen it for the first time. So I really, really appreciate it. And I think acting, spot on, nominations, great. Even I don't remember who won the acting.
Here's what I have in my notes about Kramer versus Kramer. It says, great acting, and Meryl Streep with limited screen time. And they both won the Oscar for acting, it says. Now, it might have been supporting.
Okay.
Obviously, Hoffman was lead. And I actually put a note. I don't have a problem with this until I realized the other Best Actor nominees. One was Roy Scheider for all that jazz, but then it was Al Pacino for Injustice for All, Jack Lemmon for China Syndrome, and Peter Sellers for Being There, which I think should have won.
Yeah.
There was fucking acting going on that year. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, Hoffman was great. Well, I'll just say I agree with both of you. I think it should have been, or put it this way, I think Apocalypse Now of those is the best picture of them. And I think I mentioned before, it might have been just because where the voters at the time were in their mind about what kind of movie they wanted to reward or what kind of movie meant successful. Bottom line, maybe, or maybe, oh, we want simple human stories. We don't want a hard movie. We don't want a movie where we got to work, and to get the theme, But I mean, just from the technical and the filmmaking, and then the acting, and just a lot of aspects of it are just the best. It's like such a high level.
It could have been what you said earlier. You didn't use this word, but I'm going to say it. It's like that he's an outsider. Coppola's an outsider.
Yes, even then, even after The Godfather.
You didn't say that. You said this young upstart, whatever it was. I don't remember exactly what you said, but
right.
it is, that could also be why, like, the backlash for something like that too. Like, we want to reward the people who play along with us, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. He and Spielberg and Lucas, these guys, they were looked at as they're changing how this is done, kind of thing. And to be honest, I don't know if it was for the better. I mean, I think the movies and the event movie idea is exciting and was fun, and I grew up with it. But I look at 70s movies, especially, that were done by like your traditional director, like Sidney Lumet or something. And there are some great movies, and they don't have to make. They can sit in the theater for a month or two, or and not have to make them a bunch of money, right away. Or they don't have to like be huge budgets that have to be remade in a certain amount of time. They can be modest budgets with talented writing and acting, and give it some time. And oh yeah, that's a good movie. I mean that kind of movie was kind of. The idea of doing that kind of movie was changed by these guys, Yeah. And because they were extremely talented, and they also had this sensibility of, the boomer sensibility of nostalgia and doing movies like an Indiana Jones or Jaws that are kind of a little pulpier and more fun, but the effects were changing, and it just became a different kind of movie, a different kind of movie-going experience, which again, we enjoyed, but
Well, I never had action figures for Kramer versus Kramer, so
those were fun.
Yeah, that was a good set. No, I think a huge difference between them and the previous generation of filmmakers is they grew up with the movies, whereas the previous generation didn't.
Maybe theater and writing and
television.
And television, yeah. So yeah, we all agree it should be Apocalypse Now. Yeah, like you were saying, Alan. If you think about them today and go, well, what has a lasting impact? And it still does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, Kramer versus Kramer is a very good movie. But again, with the advantage of time and retrospect and whatever, Apocalypse Now clearly.
So
is the best.
If it was just down to those 5 movies, Kramer vs. Kramer would have been my second pick of that list.
And that's what I was about to say. I think so too. Yeah, like if there was no Apocalypse Now in there,
then I would have agreed with it. Yeah. Well, I don't know what else would have taken Apocalypse Now's place. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, of the other 4, probably Kramer versus Kramer was the best.
All right. Well, there you go. I hope you enjoyed the show. 1979, a good year for movies. Thanks, Al.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
And we'll be talking at you soon. Thank you for listening to this GenXplainers podcast. Follow us on Instagram and friend us on Facebook. Just search for GenXplainers and find us on Patreon, where you can support the channel and gain access to extended cuts of the podcast as well as exclusive bonus content. See you next time.